Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death, and upon those in the tomb bestowing life.
Welcome to the show. This is Maximus Confesses. What you just heard is a little bit of Johnny Blues and the Bucket Kickers with another Arabian-style song. But now we're moving on to today's show, where we're going to be discussing the Kalam Cosmological Argument. The Kalam Cosmological Argument, put forward by Dr. William Lane Craig, is a basic deductive argument which attempts to prove that the universe began to exist at a point in time and hence requires a creator, which we will call God. The argument is most popularly formulated as such. If a thing begins to exist, it has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore it has a cause. The argument is formulated in a simple modus ponens format and concludes with the existence of a cause, which Craig extrapolates must be a divine entity. With a bit of luck for today's show, I'm going to reformulate the argument such that it gets around certain objections made to William Lane Craig's formulation. For those of you who would be interested in common criticism of the argument, I did an interview with Apologist who elaborates on them better than I could do in such a short time. The link to that interview will be in the description bar below, and his series will also be linked there as well. My own formulation of the argument does not make God's existence the case, or even more likely, but reduces the likeliness of naturalism. The definition of naturalism that I will use is the same that I've used in a prior video of mine on the cumulative case method, which was given by philosopher of religion and atheist Paul Draper. It is the view that nature is a closed system. There are no entities, either physical or non-physical, that affect the uniform operations of nature. By nature, I take Draper to mean the world in which physics attempts to study. Thus, naturalism could have non-physical entities, like Platonic numbers or other abstract objects, so long as they don't affect the natural world, but reject material entities with magic powers that can alter the uniform laws of nature at will. Let me first begin by saying that even though this argument is presented in the deductive form, it is not meant to falsify naturalism by all rational doubt. Rather, I am just showing that each premise is more probable than not, and the argument is going to show that Christianity is more likely as compared to naturalism when taking and contrasting both the Christian worldview and the naturalist worldview. With that out of the way, here are the premises. Premise 1. If the natural realm exists in causal isolation, then it cannot begin to exist. Premise 2. It would have to begin to exist. Therefore, the natural realm does not exist in causal isolation. Therefore, naturalism is false, because, as I run over earlier, part of naturalism is that it has to be causally isolated. The argument is presented in modus tollens. It is logically valid. It does not try to prove God's existence, but rather it just provides a strong case against the naturalistic hypothesis. In order to provide a basis against the argument, the naturalist will have to provide some kind of rationale for rejecting one of the premises, or show how one of the conclusions does not follow from the argument. Let's begin with the first premise. What does it mean to begin to exist? I'm going to use a loose understanding of begins to exist than what Dr. Craig has in his formulation of the Kalam. On this definition, an entity begins to exist if and only if an entity exists at some time t, and it is the first time in which that entity exists. The term natural realm is in reference to a realm which is what would obtain if naturalism were the case, or if naturalism is indeed the case. It would exist in causal isolation and would have the fact of its existence in itself, not through the existence of something transcendent to it. Now let's go to some possible objections here. The first possible objection is to point out a B theory of time. On a B theory of time, such a thing could be causally isolated. The universe, that is, could have no cause for its existence. For those of you who don't know what the B theory of time is, on this conception, time is a dimension of the universe. Pick up any object in your vicinity and examine it. What is apparent is that there are three typical dimensions of width, height, and length. And on a B theory of time, however, there is a fourth additional dimension. That is time. That object has a temporal dimension to it, and that temporal dimension reflects its persistence throughout your observation of time. Now, this is very different from maybe our common sense conception of time, which is the A theory, which would describe kind of a film point of view, where there is a film that's playing, and each specific frame is in existence at each specific point in time. None of the frames exist together, but rather you have to watch the movie frame by frame by frame, as opposed to a B theory of time where all temporal dimensions exist alongside one another. So the point in time where I was a baby exists alongside the point of time in which I am going to die and pass away, as it exists now in the present as I am speaking to you. So, if somebody is taking up a B theory objection to this argument, then there are two ways you could generally respond. The first way is to adopt an A theory of time. This is not my own approach, but if you're happy to be an atheist, there are plenty of resources for you to go after that route. However, we can grant that the B theory of time is true. If I were to say that the universe began at time t1, there would have to be one of two options the naturalist would take. The first is that it has a cause. The second is that the universe has a beginning, but it's causeless, and subsequent events are conditioned, or based off of what happens at time t1. The naturalist is going to want to go with the second option, and that's going to require some kind of response. With this, we could give skeptical scenarios. If one is willing to accept a universe with a time t1 existing without cause and conditioning other events, why not a universe that began to exist such that your memories were also conditioned 10 minutes ago? Not only would there be a skeptical scenario to come out with that reasoning, but the idea of a causeless first event is less justified than the external world. Imagine being a brain in a vat. While one's mind is able to be fooled into thinking there is no external world, it would have to still build connections between things having a beginning and having a cause for their emergence. If there were a horse that appeared out of no discernible place at time t whatever, then you would still be thinking that it emerged from someplace. Maybe it was magic. Maybe, yeah, sure, it's maybe caused by the simulation itself. We could possibly think that, yep, this proves I'm in the Matrix or something. But the whole point is, the notion of having a beginning and having a cause seems to be more rudimentary in our thinking. We have more justification. It's more foundational to our thinking than is the notion that the external world itself has an existence. So, granted, while the brain could be emergent, so could time. Causality would have to permeate through all series of emergence, lest we proclaim that something could emerge from nothing. This brings us to the next attempt at a defense, which is to claim quantum woo and say that the awesome power of quantum mechanics proves that things can come out of nothing without cause. They just show up into existence. The problem is that's not really the case. This is a notion that, as far as I could tell, was brought forward by science popularizer Lawrence Krauss in his work A Universe from Nothing. Dr. David Albert, who is a physicist and philosopher, says the following. Krauss seems to think that vacuum states amount to relativistic quantum field theoretical versions of there not being any physical stuff at all, and he has an argument, or he thinks he does, that these laws of relativistic quantum field theories entail that the vacuum states are unstable, and that, in a nutshell, it is the account he proposes of why there should be something rather than nothing. But that's just not right. Relativistic quantum field theoretical vacuum states, no less than giraffes or refrigerators or solar systems, are particular arrangements of elementary physical stuff. Now, I'm not going to say that these particles emerge or are caused by the quantum vacuum. I'm not a theoretical or quantum physicist. There are plenty of interpretations on that matter. The matter hasn't been decided, and as to what causes these virtual particles popping up and making the bubbling of the rest of our universe, I don't know. Nor should anyone claim to use this in either direction, one way or another. The possibility of something coming from nothing, in the philosophical sense of the term, not as a quantum vacuum, is still up for discussion here. Now, we might still have the criticism that is a bit more radical, that says, well, even on the theological definition or the philosophical definition of the term nothing, we still can get something to begin to exist. Well, I'm just going to go with Elizabeth Anscombe's refutation as it was formulated brilliantly in Edward Feser's work on Thomas Aquinas, A Beginner's Guide. To quote, "To imagine something appearing suddenly isn't even to imagine it, let alone conceive of it coming into existence without a cause. Suppose the situation described really happened to you. A bowling ball suddenly appears on your table. your spontaneous reaction would surely not be to conclude that it came to existence without a cause. Rather, you'd ask, where did it come from? A question which presupposes that there is a source, a cause from which the bowling ball sprang. You would also no doubt consider all sorts of bizarre explanations. A magician's trick, a mad scientist teleporting device, an improbable quantum fluctuation on the table, before it would even occur to you that there might be no cause. Indeed, this may never occur to you. Should even the most bizarre explanation be ruled out, you would probably think, I guess I'll never know what caused it, not whether it was caused. In any event, there's nothing about this kind of situation that's described that amounts to imagining something coming into existence without cause, as opposed to coming into existence with an unknown or unusual cause. With those possibilities out of the way, we can turn to our next response, which is the naturalist conceding that the natural realm consists of one necessary cause sustaining the rest of the universe in existence. This is probably the best response, and I will not go over it here. Instead, I will address it in another show entitled Why We Call It God next week. In the meantime, I ask, if there is a universe that is sustained in existence without any direct causal mechanism, how would it be distinguishable from magic? With those possibilities out of the way, let's move on to the second premise of the argument. There are two ways to move forward here. One way is in the mathematical direction, and the other is in the scientific direction. The scientific direction is one I do not recommend. That is, trying to show with science that the universe or the natural realm has a beginning, because you could always posit an even greater realm which it doesn't pertain to. This is why it's not really helpful in my viewpoint to appeal to the Born-Guth-Vilenkin theorem or the Big Bang theory. The mathematical approach is probably the better way to go about it, because math is far more foundational to science, especially in the realm of physics, as physics is just applied mathematics. To argue against an actual infinite, I would encourage people to look at Alexander Pruss's Grim Reaper argument. The argument itself can take many formulations. In fact, Rob Koons has an essay detailing many of his own formulations of the Grim Reaper paradox. But here's the one I'm going to present to you in parable form. One night you're at a party and meet a Grim Reaper named Richie, and that he is the last Grim Reaper assigned to kill Jake at 1 a.m. There are an infinite amount of Grim Reapers that Richie brought along with him. Doug kills him at 12:30, John 12:15, and so forth. The problem is for at any time after midnight you can posit one Grim Reaper killing, you can cut it in half and have one killing Jake beforehand. There is in fact an infinite amount. So there would have to be a first Reaper killing Jake, giving us a finite amount of Reapers, contrary to what Richie said, or a logical contradiction of Reapers both being able to and unable to kill Jake. The formulation of this paradox given by Alexander Pruss is not really dependent on any notion of set theory. It's not based on, like Craig's criticisms of infinity, on the difficulty of treating sets of infinities as numbers in themselves. Pruss also has another thought experiment that is way above my pay grade. I'll link it for those interested in potential arguments against an actual infinite in the description bar below. So while there can be rules of mathematics that make sense of infinities in their own set of rules, and even put them into application in our scientific models, we can give good reasons that they are neither physically or metaphysically feasible. This does not entail that they are useless to our scientific models, because we can still use math without expecting the infinite to be there. The philosopher Penelope Maddy gives the example of the assumption that oceans are infinitely deep when analyzing waves. While such an infinite is indispensable in analyzing waves, it does not mean we are committed to the notion that oceans themselves are infinitely deep. All it means is that the concept of infinity is necessary for our calculations, and that's it. And we could apply that in the same way in terms of oceans as we could probably understand that when it comes to any kind of cosmological model that could pop up if it's infinite in the past. With that, I end the show's presentation on the argument. Thank you for tuning in. If you're looking to find more of my work this week, I published 2 blog posts that were originally university essays, one on Judas Iscariot and his development in the Gospels, and the other as a comparison between the concept of love and the philosophies of Confucius and Jesus as presented in the Gospels. I hope you all enjoyed those. They can be found in the description bar below.